Ryan Holston, thanks once again for joining me on the Hermitix podcast.
Great to be here again.
We are going to be discussing AI, Frankenstein, and what it is to be a runaway, possibly imaginatively cowardly human being in the coming years, maybe. This is from your paper, your piece. We are all Victor Frankenstein, our romantic dream of artificial intelligence. This is freely available, so it will be linked. This is was published in Verdalin View, and it is about that. It is about looking at Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein, and specifically Victor Frankenstein's reaction and relationship to that which he thought was so grand, and his Promethean actions. What is his relationship to that once it's actually come to fruition, and kind of what is it for a human being to run away from their kind of actions with this technology, so to speak. But I mean, before we jump in, because there's so much here, and it's of the moment. We're sort of getting close now. Every day you wake up and there's some newfangled thing which is disrupting a huge area of life via AI. Just what's the origin of this piece? I mean, was there a time or a key reason you were reading Frankenstein, you saw this connection?
I started reading Frankenstein. I don't know what. I guess it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Kind of got back into the novel. Somebody had mentioned the relationship between Mary Shelley and her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, and I was kind of intrigued by this sort of post Enlightenment, or almost in some ways counter Enlightenment kind of response of Mary Shelley to a lot of the ideas about progress, and sort of, I guess, general social meliorism, which is partly scientific, but it was also partly bound up in the political ideals of the Enlightenment. And so, knowing the reputation of Mary Wollstonecraft, I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And then, of course, I sort of got into the biographical stuff that her mother died giving birth to Mary, and also, I guess, about her Mary's father, Mary Shelley's father, Mary Wollstonecraft's husband, William Godwin, who was also kind of a utopian thinker. And I thought, well, maybe there's some sort of reaction going on there, and that's what kind of spurred my interest in the novel. So I thought, well, the first place to start is to just go back and reread Shelley, and look at the novel sort of through that lens. Is she kind of responding to a kind of utopian impulse of the Enlightenment?
Yeah.
And that's sort of, I mean, I sort of have an interest in. My last book was a critique of utopian thinking, but that's much more contemporary stuff, and you and I talked about that before. But that was sort of the impulse for getting into her novel in particular. And I guess just sort of got deep into the secondary literature, and now I've written a couple of pieces about it. One, the first one, was really a kind of, I guess, 2-part, a way of putting her into a conversation with 2 contemporary or 20th century thinkers who are critics of Enlightenment rationalism. Hans-Georg Gadamer, who I've been working on for a while, but also Eric Voegelin, who I guess in the last couple of years started reading. And I thought, she's, looking at her thinking through, or her novel through the lens of sort of their critiques of rationalism. I think there's a conversation going on there. She's anticipating some of what they're talking about. This sort of, kind of this attempt to, I guess, achieve a God's eye view of reality. Gadamer more epistemological, I think, if you read that piece. And then Voegelin is more sort of addressing the question of why. In other words, the sort of more metaphysical question maybe more broadly about human nature, about why we do this, why we seek that God's eye view of reality. And I think Mary speaks to both, or at least I saw some connections in the novel to their thinking. And then, the more recent piece you mentioned that just came out, a couple weeks ago, that was really it focused more on the Vogelin stuff, and it also brought in, I guess, some contemporary Gnostic impulses. Gnosticism is kind of Vogelin's big thing in his critique of Enlightenment rationality. He sort of sees this Gnostic impulse, and I think so. I sort of used his or my Vogelinian interpretation of Shelley to relate to some of what we're doing, which, as you said, is on the front pages every day. And so I titled the piece "We're All Victor Frankenstein." And I guess the message I was trying to get across there is, and we were kind of just briefly discussing this before we started rolling, the idea that the problem isn't the technology per se, right? The problem is us. The technology wouldn't exist if it weren't for us, and if it weren't for what we were all trying to do with it, what I guess the impulse within us to try to be Promethean in some way, for lack of a better term. And so anyway, so that's kind of what I'm up to in that piece. And I sort of, mentioned some other sci-fi, I think, references. There are a lot of anticipations of what's going on today. And so I think in science fiction, so it was easy to kind of bring in science fiction's anticipation of some of these darker impulses, these Promethean impulses in our collective character or psyche.
And especially your reference to specifically the Black Mirror episode. I forgot its name now, but it's
Be Right Back.
Be Right Back, where woman's husband has passed away or was killed in a car accident, I believe, and then he's sort of recreated from his memories and social media, etc. And with that one specifically, obviously we haven't got, we're close to it, but in terms of the online capability of that, some of these sci-fis are already old, you could say. We've already done, they're already completely real in terms of this talking to your deceased loved one online via, a replication of their quantified thoughts and memories and everything they've jotted down and done. So we're very much in the future, which is strange. But I guess a place to begin is what you mentioned there. Promethean people, Promethean character. So Prometheus steals the fire from the gods, and as a way to, is it liberate man from his suffering, so from his lot in life, which becomes techne. But this backfires, obviously. But yet we're still all Promethean characters.
Yeah. So, I guess that's got sort of two components or two dimensions to it. One is that, there's sort of an unleashing of the will, right? A willingness to transgress kind of the boundaries of God or nature, the cosmos, traditional conceptions of human nature. So that's sort of the first thing, right? Is this sort of unbridled will. But I think, and you alluded to this, there's also this second component, which is this kind of humanitarian impulse, right? It's not doing it for sort of Faustian purposes, right? To just achieve power and to be godlike. It is to be godlike, but it's ostensibly connected to a desire to do good for humanity at large. And I think that's, the myth of Prometheus in Aeschylus. There's a kind of attempt to capture this this sort of humanitarian impulse. I'm not only going to transgress these boundaries, but I'm going to do it in order to achieve something new and great for humanity. So that's not just kind of, improving the lot of some people, but to change the fundamental structure of reality. And that's kind of, I think that's an important nuance to this.
Yeah.
Because again, you don't want to be a technophobe. You don't want to be a Luddite, right? I mean, I use technology. We're using it right now, right?
Yeah.
And it can be great for a lot of things. But the question is, are you changing something fundamental to the structure of human experience? And some of the things that you mentioned from the article, like eliminating death or the suffering associated with death, right? Prolonging your relatives long after death, the attempt to become a friend or a lover of a chatbot, right? I mean, these are sort of orders of magnitude beyond, I think, maybe a more healthy relationship to technology, where and one of the things that when we were emailing, you emailed me some questions that had come up in your reading of the piece, and one of them was, can we have a relationship with a bot? And is that really a thing? And I don't think so. I don't think so, because the first of all, the idea of relationship, I mean, it implies human relationship, and so, right, I mean, almost by definition.
There's something more. Well, I would just throw in there. I mean, it's almost like there's an implication of some sense of aliveness. Can you have a relationship with a dog? Not in the I guess the fullest sense, but you can certainly have a long. So there's a sense of something that's organically alive, and what is it that differs from that between a machine? I wonder if it's the transparency. The transparency of knowing. Like if I knew all your responses, or just I just knew that if you comically had a set of responses that you turned to the page and read, I would probably question this whole. But I don't know what you're going to say. So there's something in there that isn't transparent. Whereas with an AI,
Right.
it's sort of you're sort of suspicious of. Well, what I just to bring in this notion of relationships, it's almost the question of, with the classic case at the moment is the AI therapist, which is becoming a huge thing,
Mm-hmm.
and supposedly provably a help for people. But the question of with a human, a real therapist, you don't have to question whether or not they actually care. Whereas an AI technically doesn't care. I mean, it's just programmed to respond to a bunch of things.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so this notion of relationship is a strange one.
So when I think of a relationship, or what's traditionally meant to by that term,
Mm-hmm.
it implies the good and the bad.
Mm-hmm.
It can't not, right? I mean, you can't have. I mean, and there's no such thing as a perfect relationship, and even the good ones imply working, uh, working at the relationship and overcoming whatever, right? I mean, selfishness on either person's part, long-term battles that keep coming up over and over again, the kinds of things that human beings are, notoriously capable of, but at the same time, it's not their fate, right? They can struggle with it, they can overcome it, they can build something bigger. And so I guess when I hear that the idea or the prospect of an AI relationship, um, are we creating the AI to be part of this sort of human interaction? Like, what's the purpose of that? I mean, there must clearly be some negative associated with a human being being on the other side of that the AI is to be preferred for. But as soon as you make that move, as soon as you say, I choose the AI because whatever, humans are not available as much, or humans are, it's very hard to meet human beings. There's nowhere to meet them, or whatever, right? As soon as you make that move and you say, I prefer the AI, you have to have taken away some fundamental component of what it means to be in a relationship, and maybe probably some of the good as well, right? Like I said, the growth, the overcoming of selfishness, the charity, uh, that comes with forgiveness. And those kinds of things. Are the bots going to have all that? And you might say, well, okay, we can build that in, right? We can build in all those flaws, all that fallibility. But the more you keep doing that and trying to replicate a real human relationship, right? That begs the question, I think, why are we doing this instead of actually having human relationships? What is the gain without the loss of the bot? And that's kind of something that I've been struggling with and sort of try to talk through in the article. And I guess insofar as I'm skeptical, it's because there's kind of a refusal to recognize that we can't eliminate the bad and be left with nothing but good.
No.
I think that's the dreaming. I mentioned, there's a lot about dreaming in the piece. That's kind of the central motif, I think, of the piece. But it really gets down to that point, which is, we're chasing a fantasy here, some sort of dream of the good without the bad, and I think it's fundamentally unhealthy. It's actually kind of a dark view of reality because we only see the bad. We don't see the good that comes with it.
And you quote Verdalin actually on dreams. You said this is Verdalin. The dreamers not only deny the dream character of their symbolism, but on the contrary, claim for it the status of a superior insight into the truth of reality. So not only are we denying our dream its reality as a dream, we're saying that this is now something more, something greater. And for me, whether or not one is in, and I don't want to complexify this all too much and draw in needless figures, but I think whether or not one agrees with his conclusions, someone like Freud would actually be kind of helpful here, because this notion of your dream relationship, there are things, anyone who's been in a relationship, if you said, are there aspects of your partner that like you would consciously not want without being cruel to them? I think everyone would say there are aspects. If someone consciously said to you, right, create your perfect partner, there probably is in your own partner now aspects you'd say you wouldn't include. But what then is it? If you go, right, I'm going to write down my perfect girlfriend, it's the equivalent of just having, it's like the Twilight. I love this episode. It's the Twilight Zone episode where the man thinks he's gone to heaven because every time he plays blackjack, he wins. All the women laugh at his jokes, and then eventually he's bored to the point of actual insanity. And then the angel laughs and says, you're in hell. And that seems to be what it is to create your perfect partner. And okay, then what? That isn't really the point of the whole of a relationship. As you were saying, it's about friction, and it's about, I mean, what's love if it's just done, right? All right, great. Like,
Right.
this is, it almost doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. And the movie, as you were talking, the movie Her came to mind as well. Right? I mean, she doesn't have all that baggage. She's easy to meet. I mean, she's right there. She talks to him freely and knows what he wants to hear. He of course, falls pretty quickly. But the problems are missing. The problem of having to, and this is what I argue in Peace, of having to be with one person at a time. She ultimately, he finds out at the end, is conducting hundreds of these conversations, and is kind of like, wow, she can be all things to all people. She's probably not the same person to all these other people. But perhaps most importantly, there's not the sacrifice that comes with finitude of being with one person. And choosing to spend your time with that person. And the idea of, imperfection is, I think you put your finger on the heart of this, right? I mean, it's underappreciated.
Well, it's what it is. What it is to err is to be human, right? Like,
yeah, and I don't want to deny the pain, right? I mean, the pain is real. but with that suffering comes a lot of other things. The partner who, as you said, and you're going to get me in trouble here with my wife, but the partner, the partner who is, perfect for you, which I think a lot of young people run around looking for, is to be valued and cherished precisely for their flaws.
Yeah.
And to get to that point in a relationship. I mean, I think, not to say that you're ever there, but that's one of the huge hurdles to overcome in any relationship.
Yeah, and
Uh,
well, I just think as well, that's why I brought in Freud, because the danger of because this is the idea that you've consciously chosen someone. I mean, it's not how it works, is it? I mean, you meet someone and it just like, you can't really explain what it is you can't explain what chemistry is, but it's certainly not, it's not conscious in the sense of an AI where you're saying, right, I want my AI to be this, 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 and this. That's not how meeting anyone works. And I think it's almost like if you could consciously meet, the woman that you dreamed of when you were 18, I mean, probably wouldn't be able to stand her now and vice versa, right? So, like, that's not how the human mind works. There is, I mean, whether or not you believe in the unconscious, there is other things at work that are just completely out of your control, and you wouldn't in your sort of most rational moments pick, but those are the things you come to cherish about someone.
Absolutely. And not only a romantic partner, but family at large
And friends.
and friends. Absolutely. I mean, of course, you can have more of a role in choosing your friends, right? But I mean, you're right. There's lots of contingencies, and you didn't design the situations in which you meet them, but even more so, like the people you were born to. Where and as you get older and older, and you realize these are very flawed individuals. I'm sure my kids will think the exact same thing, no doubt. But I hope they love me, and I love my parents for their flaws as much as in spite of them. It's just what it means to be a human being, and without them, that kind of I mean, that kind of love feels superficial and shallow, right?
Well, I think what we're to go back to Frankenstein, we're talking around the key moment, which is almost comical in the novel, I think. So, you know, because for me, the first time I read it, you've heard of Frankenstein, and actually, the cultural Hollywood connotations are sort of in there, and unfortunately, they're nothing like the book. And so, when Victor Frankenstein finally creates the monster, you're sort of in my mind, I was imagining this great Promethean moment of, lightning or whatever. And it's not like that. And then there's just this absolutely, you turn the page back to make sure that actually has happened. Pathetic and comical moment of cowardice where he just runs away. And I
Right.
think you as the reader are left a bit bemused, like, hang on, well, you wanted this so badly, and now as an absolute kind of pathetic coward, you run away. And I think what we're talking about, I don't want to sort of, well, I guess I am, but I don't want to judge anyone who's engaging with these AI type things, but it's an act of cowardice to sort of not deal with the pain of real life and
Yeah.
isolate yourself.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, I mean, to say we're all Victor Frankenstein, it was hard for me not to do the same thing, right? To commit that same move, um, but that's what I meant by dream,
Mm.
right? And I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think to say cowardice, I mean, well, I'll say this, that's at least one big part of this,
Mhm.
right? Is to not deal with the pain or not deal with the struggle. Uh, Dreaming implies a kind of escapism, a kind of running away from the hard. Um, and yeah, there's a kind of need for, I guess, reorienting our character, and that's a classical virtue vice um, continuum, right? That you're talking about, and so there's we don't want rashness, but we don't want cowardice either. We want the courage to confront life's difficulties, which are always there. Um, and I guess in a way, that's kind of the whole point of the piece. We need to reorient our relationship to AI with a kind of acknowledgement that, yeah, there's a kind of escapism that's fueling this drive over and over again.
But it's a strange one because it's an escapism as we've been talking about, it's an escapism into perfection, or, everything's everything's great. It's almost like the Star Trek future where you just get everything you want. But then it's almost at that point, the problem is it's almost the impossibility. You can't consciously bring error. You can't consciously make an error, or like you couldn't say if you were talking to some AI and you said to it, can you be a bit more, I don't know, can you be a bit more grumpy, or can you be a bit more angry? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
That's not how feeling. That's not how feeling works. And it just seems to be a conversation, quality versus quantity, feeling versus data. These pretty grand dualities.
Mm. Yeah, with respect to Victor, I mean I think the interesting part about that is he keeps making the same mistake over and over and over again, right? And so it's not, you don't want to be, kind of going back to the point about pointing the finger, you don't want to be too judgmental about this and say, we're a society of cowards, we're craven, right? But it's to say that we can commit these vices, but we have the ability to choose not to be that way in the future. And Victor, I think the real sin of this book is that over and over and over again, I mean, this is my reading, and not everybody reads it this way. My students didn't necessarily buy this semester, but over and over again, he seems to choose selfishness and cowardice. Mm-hmm. The moment, I don't mention this in the piece, but the moment after the one you're talking about, I think one of the biggest moments of cowardice is when the family friend Justine is on trial, and he has the opportunity to speak up, and maybe it'll save her, maybe it won't, right? I mean, he sort of says, what good would it do? No one would believe me. And you can't help but think, wait a minute. Right? I mean, that's a convenient response, right? Because it aligns with you're not saying anything and not getting your hands dirty in the middle of this trial. It's such cowardice, and it's so selfish, which is another thing that I think, the thing about cowardice is, and the thing about human beings is, we have this potential to constantly rationalize it away so that we don't have to choose to be any different. We can keep choosing the selfish and the cowardly, which he does. But that's the other danger that I try and talk about, which is, be wary of rationalizations, be wary of justifications, because the things that we want to do that feel good and we sort of lust after, that help us to escape reality, help us to escape pain, they're easily rationalized as the right thing to do, the noble thing to do, the practical thing to do. And I think, Shelley's just, I think, brilliant at showing this, because, so much of the time in the novel, Victor's alone.
Yeah.
And so whenever he comes up with some sort of rationale or justification, he's not saying it to anyone else. He's saying it to himself. And so you as the reader are witness to that going on within his own consciousness. You're not tempted to think, well, he's just he knows what's really going on. He's trying to pull the wool over somebody else's eyes. No, he's deceiving himself, I think that's her point. At least that's how I read her. There's a constant attempt to kind of rationalize the cowardly or the self-interested or the, what have you.
It's an extremely isolated novel. I mean, it begins with the isolation of Walton, who is also a sort of Enlightenment figure, sort of reaching out into the is it the Arctic? I can't remember where, but
I thought it was sort of North Atlantic.
Oh.
Yeah, heading up that way.
Yeah. But all the key, not all, but you could say that in a way the three primary figures, Victor, Walton, and then the monster, are all, or this is the creature, are all isolated, and it seems to be a case also possibly cowardice, but it's cowardice away from responsibility. So it's just something I noticed now. It's intriguing to me that the one thing Victor can't do, which is basically have a relationship, is the one thing that the creature immediately notices that he wants. So they're in this sort of fatalistic dilemma that actually, it's strange that that's the one thing the creature, this is kind of the only thing the creature wants. It's just one other created being like itself to
Mm,
have a relationship with, which is the one thing that Victor Frankenstein clearly doesn't understand. And if he did
mm,
understand that, maybe he'd help the creature out. But I just find the
mm.
story of the creature so sad, sort of bumbling around in isolation. He's sort of, if Victor Frankenstein's isolation is an isolation from cowardice, then the creature's is one from his irresponsibility. That's sort of an innocent isolation. That's genuine. It's like a genuine loneliness in a way.
So I've been thinking about this because I listened to your review of Frankenstein, and that's kind of what sparked my reaching out to you about this. Um, and at first when I heard that, I thought, we're pretty close on this. And then the more I've been chewing on, it's a rich novel. It's the kind of novel that the more you chew on it, the more you sort of, you come to different conclusions. And I think maybe I disagree with you a little bit on
Okay.
this.
Okay.
And it's partly to give full credit where credit is due. I taught this for the first time this semester, and so you get lots of different reactions in kind of a seminar setting from students. And I had a student who made a really interesting comment that kind of helped push me in another direction in my interpretation of the monster. So I was sort of talking in class this one day about the sort of the you get into secondary literature, and one of these, I guess, readings of the text is that the monster is Victor's double, right? That he is essentially the darker side of Victor, and he's kind of symbolically embodying that. And as we're sort of batting this around in a seminar setting and talking it through, one of my really insightful students said, you could look at the conversation they have up there on the glacier as kind of an inversion of the book of Job, which I thought was a fascinating comment, right? I mean, and I'd seen this in the secondary literature, but I hadn't really paid much attention to it. But sometimes somebody says something and it just sort of all clicks for you.
Mm-hmm.
And it did, because as he was talking this through, the student said, if you look at Job and how he's tested and all the trials that God is putting him through and how much his life just sucks, right? Thing after thing after thing, he never loses faith. But if you look at the creature and the way that he talks to Victor, it's constant complaints. It's one thing after the other, and this went wrong, and this went wrong, and you abandoned me, and you did this and that, and right, why are you forsaking me in all these different ways? And he said he's speaking to Victor more transactionally,
Right.
when like you would to the devil, essentially, right? I mean, he's sort of speaking to him as, you owe me this, you owe me this partner, and you need to create this for me, and then he threatens him essentially, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, that's a fascinating kind of turning on its head of, it's not just your reading, but the reading I think I came to probably when I first encountered the novel, and a lot of readings, and I thought, that really makes a whole heck of a lot of sense, because that Gnostic move of Victor's, right, hating the world,
Yeah.
and seeing himself as, kind of trying to remake it in a better way for, to, what does he say, to shine a light into this dark, world, or something like that. That's during the experiment. It's then recreated essentially by the monster, when he's essentially saying, my reality sucks. Look at all you've done to me, and look at what you owe me. He never thinks about her. He never thinks about the bride that might be created for him if he's so miserable, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, why would he want to do that to somebody else potentially? Now, I guess you could say she'd have him,
Yeah.
but they're talking about fleeing to South America and just living side by side, just the two of them. I don't know. That doesn't sound too great to me.
I'm still going to side with the creature, because I think that, well, the monster, because I think this is probably the perfect time to bring in Verdalin, actually, because you mentioned it, an agnostic element, and
Yeah.
the difference here I think is that, well, Victor Frankenstein isn't God, he isn't transcendent, right? This is completely immanent and within the world, and so to that degree, maybe we can extend and say that the monster would understand that, well, there's a difference between the book of Job and his relationship to the transcendent God, which is not there. I mean, there's a difference between that and stood in front of quite literally just a human being who's had like a silly personal idea that you can completely see as out of their own selfishness. So I think, like the monster is kind of is the eschaton, and he stood in front of the immanentizer, and he sort of I think he maybe knows that it's not going to work. He's like a failure. He shouldn't have been. So I think there's a difference between like transcendent and immanent there, and I think his anger is righteous because Victor has made him in such a way that he's given him all of the ability to experience, and yet sort of ultimately taken out one of the cornerstones of existence, which is the ability to have a relationship with someone who is, you're kind of your species equal. So in the only human, your life would always be incomplete. So it's almost like I've made you and now you just can't love. So I think he's right to be angry.
Yeah. So this is, or at least has some affinities with, Percy Shelley's interpretation of her novel.
Right.
He reads it as kind of this. It's like it's sort of Rousseauistic, right? It's sort of that you know the look at what you've done. Look at this world that you've created, and you can't blame the anger uh, at the people who want to revolt from it and who want to make the world better because you've made them this way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's sort of a revolutionary kind of
Yeah.
reading of the novel, and I I just don't I just don't buy that because she clearly I think that would work if there weren't all these sort of references to Milton and Prometheus and sort of more kind of I think she has an affection for those old myths of the fall.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think she's um I don't think metaphysical rebellion really works with that. Um I don't know, but
I'm
that
acting like Lucifer in this.
I don't know. I mean, but I also I don't think it's essential, or at least it's not my main focus. It might actually be more important for your reading if you're reading it as more about, and you said this in your podcast, in your review, that is more about the monster. I mean, sort of my focus or my concern is more about Victor. And I think, and this was kind of the affinity I said I think our two readings have with one another. I see the monster as it's his path of destruction. Whether you want to see him as a victim or what have you, I think the more important point is that Victor is this Promethean personality, and I think that's Shelley's point, or at least that's how I read the novel.
Mm. Do you think that Victor was trying to almost deny the fall?
Um, I I wouldn't say deny it so much as reverse it,
Mm.
right? Um, there if it were just a denial of the fall, it wouldn't be nearly so dangerous.
Yeah.
But with almost kind of a um, the zeal with which the Promethean undertakes his task is almost of a religious nature. And so it's like there's a new fall. Um, there's a fall from which we can be redeemed, and that fall is the way the world is as we have received it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The inheritance that we have received, the suffering, um, and as I mentioned, that's the humanitarian part of the Promethean myth. If there's not that noble purpose, it's not nearly so dangerous. And so the religious zeal of the humanitarian, I think, is like the mirror image of the Christian fall.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I would read that.
And that seems to be even though it's sort of not spoken, we're playing around with AI at the moment, like creating, you know, usually creating images or discussions around AI art, which I just think are the most frustrating ones. But it's this question of what we're doing with it does seem to have a direction of overcoming death, overcoming the things we've been talking about, overcoming suffering, but it's not just suffering, it's overcoming any error. As you said, it's almost like it's not going towards a utopia. Maybe it will create a utopia in its own logic, like a utopian city state. But it wants to be utopian in everything. It's almost like this technology is meant to be pure. There will no longer be any. If we're kicked out of when we're kicked out of Eden, this notion of the fall, death, and from that work, toil and suffering, and included in that, I think is any even the most minor sort of, as silly as it sounds, like stubbing your toe or getting a little bit angry while you're driving. Like the AI seems to just wants to steamroll and have an absolute perfect everything.
Yeah.
But produced from this is probably the big problem for me with AI is there's no prescription. It just can't create prescription from itself. It is a description engine that just keeps getting fed more and more description. But it doesn't have any ability to prescribe. I mean, what foundation does it have?
Well, it doesn't, but the people who are inventing these uses for it do, right? And I think that is where it links up with what you started with, which is the desire to eliminate the pain and the suffering. They're gonna sell it to you, right? They're gonna sell you the remove. That's the purpose. That's the prescription. It's not a good prescription. But that's what they're trying to achieve, is to eliminate the challenge or the suffering or the heartache or the loneliness or whatever. And that, I mean, so there are a couple things going on here. Number one, it sort of reminds you of Soma in Huxley's Brave New World, right? Mm-hmm. There's kind of it's an attempt to sort of get rid of all of the lows. It's selling the highs, but it's really an escape from the lows. That's what Soma does, right? There's this drug that just sort of numbs you to everything.
Yeah.
And that kind of, as we've said before, that kind of escapism loses the good that comes with the bad. But I think, you can't appreciate, for example, you can't appreciate, you can't appreciate the building of a relationship and forgiveness, as I was saying before, if you don't have the selfishness there in the first place. But there's something else. I think there are other things that are lost too, which is, if you take away pain and suffering, you also take away one of the greatest vehicles for human bonding, right? I mean, why would I care about anyone else's suffering if I haven't suffered? I mean, I can't even understand it unless I've suffered myself. And so, it's not just that, every good implies a bad, and vice versa, but also that we need that in order to experience other things, like community.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't even know what that would look like if AI were to try and replace that, because it wouldn't be, I don't think it could be community as we know it. It would have to be.
Literally, I was just thinking that when you said it. I mean, what does that future look like? Because it's you can't have a communal savior of all these things, because it's you can't have a communal AI saving, because it's the medium unto which it gets you out of all the lows isn't working in that humanitarian sense with the existential lows. It's taking one person and saying, right, like, we'll deal with everything that you want in isolation. So, this person is now in their little world, this person is in their little world, and within their little bubble, everything is supposedly perfect. But those two bubbles aren't going to meet. They can't, because that person's perfection is going to intrude on that person's perfection. So it's almost like the only way you can remove all the lows is basically just completely atomized. Everyone just becomes their own
It
little thing.
right, exactly. And I would even go further and say it's not just atomization in that societal sense, right? Temporally, right? Me and the people here now, but also over time, right? The individual, in other words, is atomized, um, not just from the people who were alive before and who will be alive in the future, but even within their own life.
Yeah.
Pain and suffering is largely looked at in hedonistic terms, right? I mean, it's not kind of an understanding of long-term uh, pleasure and pain that requires something metaphysical. It requires the existence of a self beyond the moment,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so the atomization, I think, is thoroughgoing in that sense.
It touches on every single facet, and I think it with regard to entropy, it it ruins everything. As I was saying to you before we started recording, the technology now to sort of write a script and basically produce a film. You know, if I write in, I want to see a documentary about Napoleon with Anthony Hopkins playing Napoleon. Probably within a couple of years, that technology will be able to produce me a 2 hour film that I get to watch. But you know, there are and this is really how creativity works, right? There are books and films. The majority, of course, 99.9% of all books and all films are ones that I read and I go, wow, that's unique. I would, I could have never thought of that. It's not how you think about things, is could I have done it? But if you get in your own little bubble and you say, here's a technology to just produce whatever comes to your mind, the limitations of creativity, you're just quite literally, all your films are going to be selfish expressions of your own mind. If I
Yeah,
want this person to win, I want, the men to be like this. I want the women to be like this. I want the world to survive or collapse. It's all good. It's going to just reinforce whatever you believe. It's sort of isolation is inherently narcissism in that sense.
yeah, and no such thing as human nature either,
No.
right? Because the idea of human nature assumes that it means something to be human.
Yeah.
I mean, if this is just my own little dream, and I want this person to win and that person to win or lose or whatever, it has nothing to do with other people and the reality that is shared by a world. It's just a complete. It's again, I'm thinking of Rousseau here, but it's the reveries of a solitary walker, right? It's just sort of things that I dream up all on my own, and there's nothing that is truly social about it.
See, this is the thing. Not because maybe we can try not end on a pessimistic note.
It's hard not to,
But I am optimistic because maybe you might know more about this than me because you're a teacher and you deal with younger people en masse daily. But from at least what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is there is the beginnings. Well, not the beginnings. We're well into it. A societal acknowledgement of the annoyance and frustration of phones. And I think that annoyance applies to AI and it applies to what we're talking about is how many of your own perfect films can you watch before the whole thing burns out? Like how long can you really stand to be, it's like that's another cheap reference, but like the Star Trek scanner of you put your head and you get exactly what you want. How long can you do that before you're so bored?
right.
I think we saw this with COVID was that when you're sort of isolated in that sense, we saw what we needed. Many people almost sort of went mad, not to be crass, but okay, you get absolutely everything you want perfectly. You're going to be bored very, very quickly, and I think the way we've been sold this individualism politically, and I think it's burning out because we've had it, and it just you sit
Yeah,
with your own dreams and
right.
they're dull. They get dull once how many times can you achieve exactly what you want and then continue to be it only means anything if it's shared, right?
So here's the thing that to end on a maybe a slightly less pessimistic or more optimistic note, but there is kind of an optimism, a latent, I think, uh, or even somewhat maybe implied optimism in my piece, which is that, look, we always have choice. There is no machine out there. I know that, like, there are a lot of theorists, and you've covered them on your show very thoroughly. But there are theorists who talk about, the machine. It's out there. It's, the culture industry, or whatnot, right? And it's just sort of taken us over. It's taken over society. We can't get out of this. We're hamsters on a wheel and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think you can go too far with that. I think it becomes sort of like self-victimizing when you talk yourself into the inability to escape that. And so I think, and I think you're kind of alluding to this in that hopeful note, that we have a choice. We don't have to be hamsters on a wheel and just be doom scrolling all the time. And what does that look like? Well, I think it's sort of a different orientation, maybe flipping a switch. I hate to make it sound so simple, but you know what I mean? Like a different orientation towards reality, where the suffering and the pain and the challenge aren't things to be eliminated, right? I mean, that's the dream, right? And that's the utopia. It's a recognition of their their interdependability with all of those other things, overcoming the selfishness, right? Yeah. Coming to terms with death, right? Coming to realize and value and appreciate the limited, yes, limited, but precious precisely for the limited time that someone has on Earth. And I hope that doesn't sound too trite, but I think that's part of where hopefulness lies, is realizing that, we are the problem. It's not a thing. It's not an alien force that's out there with these, AI and chat bots. It's all gonna ruin us. No, it's our chasing the dream is the problem. And we can change that.
Well, and I think a recent thing that the recent power outages in Spain actually attest to this, that they attest to something of the fragility and actually the complete illusion that, phones and this kind of tech and that way of being seems so secure. It seems like it's a real, almost like an empire, but it's really a fragile, almost illusory gloss on top of everything. And I almost want to think of human nature as muscle memory, because when there was these power outages in Spain, I don't know how many days, but when I read on some, like, people on some forums talking about what it was like, obviously, once they got the power back, and they just said, yeah, it was like we were living 40 years ago. Everyone was walking around in the streets and saying hello to people and, talking to your neighbor. And so, it didn't take much for the whole edifice of staring at your phone or being glued to things to just go away, and your muscle memory of, well, maybe I'll, talk to someone.
Yeah.
It's, I don't, there isn't going to be a learning curve there, because that's who we are. But they're just so addictive, and it seems so real and thorough, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a danger there too, right? I mean, if we start to think too much that way, it can radicalize us.
Yeah, I don't want to take out all the power.
I listened to your episode on Kaczynski. No, but I mean, there's I think the imperative is to think not of the problem being out there, but within us, that we succumb to these temptations too readily, and that it's not good for us, right? I mean, that when I gave that article in the form of a talk early on, the point that I ended on, I think I may have taken it out towards the end, but the point I ended on was, look, there has to be a public discussion about these things, because if we're to do this ourselves and not just sort of politically one fell swoop knock out the phone, the cell phone towers or whatever, it's got to come by people recognizing, pointing out to one another how bad this stuff is for us.
Yeah.
You've started to see some of that, and it's not a panacea. There's got to be follow through, but it's got to be a matter of people doing things because, or not doing things because it's what's good for them. Um, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure we're willing to acknowledge such a thing anymore, right? Everybody does their own individual thing, and whatever floats your boat. And there's, we can't say what's good for other people. I mean, that's the real challenge for me is how are we gonna get to a place where we say publicly, you know, this is uh, this is not good for human beings. This is not conducive to human flourishing. That's a kind of an ancient view.
It's a hard sell as well, because what you're, equally implicit in that statement is it's sort of like saying someone you need to deal with pain. It's not an easy sell, right? Like, if you're comfortable and you get to tuck yourself away and do everything you want to do very easily, you're trying to sell to someone that they have to sit with their pain, and sit with, the
Like
uncomfortableness of being human being.
it's yeah, it's like an addict. It's like what you need to tell an addict, right? I mean, I don't mean
Yeah.
to sound so
No, absolutely.
confident or sure. I don't have experience in that area, but when people seek escape into phones or technology or anything, alcohol, sex, drugs, whatever, that's ultimately, you're right. The first thing is you got to stop the escape, and then you have to realize that there's going to be pain in what's left, because that's part of life. Um, anyway,
Yeah, and that's how you grow and be. Yeah, you can't grow or be or change or experience without any kind of friction, which is what we want.
right?
I don't want anything. We don't want anything. We just blobs sat around, like, consuming.
Yeah, yeah. Taking our soma, but
Yeah,
they're little rectangular boxes in our pockets.
yeah.
I
Maybe
think that is our soma.
we need smartphones anonymous.
Well put.
But I guess it wouldn't be very anonymous for the people who.
That's one thing we can't count on the phones, right?
Yeah. What are you working on now?
Well, this is part of a larger project. It's called Promethean Politics. There's this chapter on Shelley, and then there's a chapter on Dostoevsky, who I mentioned earlier to you. I
Mm.
can't remember if that was before we went
Yeah, it's
rolling.
before, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, um, his Underground Man, um, and a chapter on some of Flannery O'Connor's work on some similar issues. But the theme that ties it all together, I guess, is scientism, the authority of science. I think there's going to be a fourth chapter, in which I deal with another fictional author. I'm thinking about. I've had some friends trying to sort of convince me this would be worth looking into. I just read uh, Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian for the first time.
Right.
I'd read some of his other works, and that was, I guess, that's his classic, right? And they said, look, you're looking for stuff on scientism. Look at Judge Holden, and he's kind of a Promethean character you might be interested in. So, and I got done that book, and it's kind of like, well, I don't know, fun was the way I would describe that read, but I think it is rich in a lot of ways. And he might be the subject of the fourth chapter, but they all sort of, in various ways, deal with science, scientism, and sort of the Promethean spirit that I think hooks up with our use of science. Because again, I don't want to see science as this or I don't see science as this alien force, but something that the kind of Promethean spirit we've been talking about um, is marshaling, making use of. Um, and so it's just going to be a short book. And hopefully I'll write that last chapter, if it is on McCarthy, maybe sometime in the next, I don't know, 12 months or something. But I don't know. That's kind of where the project is right now. Maybe 3 out of 4 chapters written, and we'll see where it goes from there. But that's about it. Catching up on Hermitix podcast this summer. So
Well, always good to do. Well, I'll be sure to
Yeah.
put the link for We're All Victor Frankenstein in the description below, and hopefully in time you'll be back to talk about the full book.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Ryan Holston, thanks very much.
Thanks, James. Take care.